been talking about doing this for a long time, and now we're actually doing it.
We still haven't decided on a name for our podcast. So by the time this is released, we'll have a name. But for now, welcome to our podcast.
Well, we'll start with domestic. What is going on with the Democrats?
Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, he is the Democratic minority leader in the Senate right now. He basically passed a budget to avoid a government shutdown. And this is problematic because the Republicans basically were able to get everything that they wanted put into the budget itself. So basically, all of the liberal base is kind of left scratching their head, wondering what exactly it is that happened because nobody knows why this budget was passed. And they waited until the very last minute, to basically announce that they were going to pass it.
They being.
The Democrats.
Oh, okay. I wonder if there was I guess leading up to that last minute, if there was a lot of back and forth, or how it came to that, because that's kind of strange.
Well, the Democrats are strategic. They are like any other politicians in that sense. They do plan to make these sort of political choices, meaning that they sit around in back rooms, they debate on what the proper way to do things is. And so ultimately, they came to the decision that rather than incensing their base to get them to force concessions out of Republicans and use the budget proposal as leverage,
Hmm.
they basically just announced last minute and didn't let anybody have any kind of say in their base
I see.
about what happened.
Okay. You think they did that on purpose,
Oh
so that
yeah.
there wasn't any time?
Oh yeah. Absolutely. I mean, Chuck Schumer is a staunch Zionist. And the things that are included in this budget proposal are not just the usual stuff, right? It's money to Israel. It's the budgeting around tariffs. And basically all this does is solidify all of the choices that President Donald Trump has made. And this basically means that they don't have any other leverage for the rest of the year. As far as I know, budget proposals are basically put in annually. So because the majority of all three branches of government are being controlled by Republicans right now, they don't have any other political means to do anything meaningful from here on out. And this was their one shot. And rather than incensing their base to get anything out of Republicans, this is what they chose
To avoid a government shutdown. That was what they're.
to. Yes,
That's what they're saying.
that's what they're saying, to avoid a
Okay.
government shutdown. But really, a government shutdown isn't the worst thing that could happen. Probably the worst thing that could happen is the fact that all of these budget initiatives are being codified, basically. Government shutdown doesn't necessarily affect you or me as constituents in a very meaningful way, especially not for a couple days. It would be something that would incense us, it would incentivize us. And I was saying this before, but basically if I was a Democrat right now, I would be using the media. I would take this to the court of public opinion. I would basically be like, the Republicans aren't doing anything at all right now to protect everybody in the United States, Americans in general. And rather than them taking this to the court of public opinion and incensing everybody, they basically just tried to pass it under the cover of night. And Chuck Schumer is getting massive backlash in the media, including another fellow TikToker basically talked about James. He talked about, I showed you the video, where he basically he's trying to promote his book right now about, I think, Israel.
Chuck?
Yeah. And his base is like totally ignoring his book. He's getting facing backlash. He had to cancel part of his tour, basically incentivize people to come and check out his book.
Oh, it's his list of priorities. The budget is not on the top. It's his book first.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's so funny.
I mean, I also said this before, but he's an APAC controlled Democrat, and I think what we're seeing is this move on behalf of the Democrats and Republicans to basically appease Israel. Like, this is very clearly Israel intervening in American politics, or maybe it's just the fact that American interests are tied to Israel. Really, it's like a chicken and egg situation. Like, it could be that they're just, because Israel is a proxy of the United States, that this is just how things are panning out. But yeah, in the end, basically, Chuck Schumer is just another representative for Israeli interests.
How much do you think he's getting paid? Or how much do you think he got paid?
Well, there's on X, there's something called the APAC tracker, and you can actually find out how much each of these politicians. Let me look it up real quickly here. You can find out how much each politician has been paid for by APAC, and I know that it's a lot. Oh yeah, so according to APAC tracker, as of earlier last year, he got 1,700 and almost 30,000.
That's all it takes, huh?
I mean, 1,000,000 is not a small amount of money, but somebody said that the average buyout from APAC is around $30,000, so that's how much it takes to sell out.
Damn, that's crazy.
Yeah, it's cheaper for you to buy a politician than it is for you to pay your mortgage.
Damn.
It'd be better for you to codify,
What if we
law.
like crowdfunded for a politician?
I know,
That would
right?
be
Right? It would totally work is the thing. Um, yeah. Anyway, that's what's going on with Chuck Schumer.
all right. What about at Columbia University? We got that. Was that arrest that happened recently?
So it's actually so much worse than that.
Oh yeah.
So Mahmoud Khalil, he is a student at Columbia University,
Uh huh.
and he is a green card holder. And I said this in a video that I posted on TikTok, but this is really the first time that we're seeing government crackdowns on free speech that are really, really overt. What we're talking about here is a legal resident of the United States, a green card holder, somebody who's documented,
Hmm.
right? They do have limited documentation because he's not a citizen,
Hmm.
but he in Mexico we call this a political forcible disappearance. And basically he was taken by the police
Hmm.
because of protesting for Palestine. This is a very classic, like open and shut textbook case of free speech expression. He didn't commit any acts of violence, dissent. This
Hmm.
is protected speech, and he was disappeared. And they're threatening to revoke his green card. Um, so it's pretty serious. And Columbia University has, I think, like some millions of dollars that the Trump administration is holding hostage over the free speech movement. The Trump administration is essentially saying to Columbia University that if they don't crack down on this speech, that
Hmm.
they're not going to give them that money back. And I'm not sure how much it is exactly. I think it was 400 million, but
It took a change either way.
very punitive. Oh, the other thing that's happening is that Columbia University is beginning to revoke.
Differences?
No, not the acceptances. Their diplomas.
Oh really? Damn, that's crazy.
Yeah, I think like
If
13
they're gonna do
students.
that, then they gotta refund them at least.
That's what everybody's saying, but they don't.
That's
They
mad.
obviously don't. They obviously can't
Yeah.
because the money's being held over their head in the first place.
Huh.
So yeah. So can you imagine?
So
So you
don't
have
go to Columbia.
yeah, you have a degree. You have your
Yeah, yeah,
degree.
yeah.
Like, what do you think about that?
I think I would be really mad. I think I would charge them my tuition with interest,
Yeah, absolutely.
especially if it meant I had to go back to school.
I think it would ruin our lives.
Oh yeah, yeah,
Like,
yeah.
it would totally ruin our lives. Like, we're talking about, like, I took you the other day to a protest. Can you imagine, like, you're an alum, you're protesting in the
Uh-huh.
for the benefit of you know, of your fellow alumni from the same institution that you went to, right?
Mm.
And your diploma, you already completed your education, you
Uh-huh.
already have your degree, and your degree gets rescinded.
But you know what's funny is that I'm thinking about how the degree is supposed to represent the amount of time that you've committed to studying a certain topic.
Right.
And if they remove the degree, it doesn't mean that they've removed the time. So even I'm thinking like, okay, if I was an employer and my this happened to my employee who I hired based on having this degree, there's a lot of discretion that you can use, you
A
know.
lot of abuse of power too.
Yeah, yeah, but I think at the end of the day, this is a conversation for a different time about how the paper, the degree itself doesn't really matter, especially if it can be taken away in that
Well,
fashion.
I think that's what we're gonna start seeing. I think we're
Mm,
gonna start seeing whether they like it or not, Columbia University is delegitimizing itself as an institution.
right.
And people are already starting to say, I think at least 30 different students across social media have talked about how they rescinded their applications to Columbia, and Columbia was on their top universities to attend.
Mm,
And if I'm not mistaken, Columbia is one of the top 10. universities.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's the name is associated with some prestige for sure.
Yeah, I was talking to my professor of sociology, and she was saying that one of the primary reasons Columbia feels like it has to crack down on its student population is because they've pushed out a lot of radicals by accident. So like because Edward Said came out of Columbia University, they
Mm,
feel like they have to crack down on dissent because a lot of students from the past have come out of Columbia basically criticizing the institution itself,
mm,
and they themselves have produced works that are impressive. I think Edward Said produced a book on ethnicity that my like Soch 101 professor introduced to me. I think I still have a copy of it somewhere in here. So yeah, I think it's a really interesting conversation, particularly where like right now, even the left has really absorbed the narrative that education doesn't matter.
mhm,
Now institutions as well of education don't matter. And I think this has really serious negative ramifications. Already Americans are very undereducated.
mhm,
So I don't know. I think it says a lot, and I think it's going to have huge ramifications long term, especially Columbia University dissent doesn't succeed.
mm. Yeah. Well, I think they have a choice to make. You know, I think they're gonna make the choice to preserve their funding because that's what they do
Oh
as a
yeah.
business. But I think it does open up this interesting conversation around education versus degrees, right?
Yeah. I mean, I do think that like I've personally been accused a lot of academic elitism because I like to cite that I'm attending one of the top 10 universities when I'm talking on my TikToks. But I do think that for better or for worse, like institutions do need to exist to
Mm,
like give legitimacy to the education quality that you're receiving. Because if you went to like a clown college or one of those predatorial college institutions that
mhm,
just, they're like affiliated with like some kind of private equity firm, I think it's not the same caliber of education, and a lot of it is just straight up misinformation.
mhm,
And I think that Columbia being like it's a very recognized institution. It's like
mhm,
it's like probably one of the big ones. And if the dissent doesn't succeed, I think it will have ramifications for Americans who already I think the literacy rate on average is 6th grade.
mhm,
Most Americans can't read a scientific journal. Most Americans don't know how to interpret news
mhm,
correctly. Most Americans can't distinguish between their feelings, their negative feelings when hearing journalism
mhm,
versus accepting things as fact.
mhm,
And I think that's really undermined the American sense of curiosity as well as their ability to be political participants. Like, yeah, I don't know. I
mhm,
think it has huge ramifications for society. I don't love academic elitism conceptually, but I understand its purpose and I understand a lot of ways its necessity. And I have
mhm.
a lot of feelings about that, but
Yeah, I mean, I think at the end of the day, it can be a tool, and you can decide when to use it or how to use it correctly.
yeah,
But it doesn't work for every situation. So,
yeah. At
but
least we can't take away the education itself.
yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like, you can't really. I mean, you could take somebody's degree away, but does that make them not no longer an expert in their field if that's how far they've taken it?
Oh, wow. How would you handle telling people that you had a degree and that it was rescinded? Would you put it on your resume still? What would you do?
I would. I would say that I received it at on this year and it was rescinded on this year. That's probably what I would put.
I would put for what it got rescinded for,
Oh yeah.
and I'd link a journalism article to it.
Yeah, no, this could totally become like personal statement material.
Oh yeah, you could totally turn
This
it into an
is a really
accolade.
good stuff, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. That would be smart. I hope that they start doing that. The students. I hope that they start turning it into an accolade.
Yeah,
Anyway,
okay. Well, let's transition to international politics. It's a lot of a bombing
I
going on
mean,
over in
um,
Yemen.
I don't even know what to say. It's actually such a tragedy because so the original, I don't remember his name, but the Trump administration had hired somebody to broker deals between Israel and Palestine. And he was in the news recently, I think like last week,
Mhm,
for talking about how Hamas was regular people and how he liked them, that they were like nice guys, essentially.
mhm,
And it really made waves. Well, anyway, the Trump administration rescinded his position And since the ceasefire proposal has completely broken down in Palestine, particularly in the Gaza Strip, and there was already like a ton of amped up bombing since October 7th in the West Bank. So yeah, between all of this stuff deteriorating, basically what it resulted in is that Palestine is the ceasefire is null and
Mhm.
void. And of course, we're seeing again with Chuck Schumer and the government shutdown and like the bill, the budgetary proposal, which includes defense budget.
Mhm.
Um, we're going to see money going to Israel and doing what they do. And of course, hopefully people know this, but Israel has ties to Congo and Sudan in terms of the way that the genocide is being carried out because there's military funding and weapons and just like sort of a lot of dark money stuff happening in the background.
Mhm.
And basically every bad thing that's happening in the world right now that has any affiliations with the West has some sort of complicity with Israel. Like, Israel is somehow involved in it in everything internationally.
Mhm.
So that's kind of the update on Palestine, Congo, and Sudan. M23 has like seized Goma and then like lost Goma within the last month a couple times in Congo.
Mhm.
And then in Sudan, there's just been like there was some successes I think like last month, but yeah, I mean, I'm not an expert on Sudan. There's a lot of blackouts on Sudan and Congo. I know a little bit about Palestine, but only because of what I know from social media. But that's the
Mhm.
gist of what's going on over there.
How are things in Mexico?
Oh my gosh. So did you hear about Teuchitlan?
Mhm.
Um, so there was a site that was discovered. It was a cartel training site.
Oh, I did hear about that. They found a
Yeah.
bunch of shoes, right?
It was what?
A bunch of shoes?
And remains. Yeah, so what they're saying well, there was somebody that was interviewed that apparently I don't remember where I read this. I've been following the story for a while now, but they were saying that there were basically these levels of training, and it started this is like the kindergarten of the cartel, specifically of Cartel Jalisco Nueva Generación, which is CJNG. It's hard for me to translate those from English to Spanish all the time. But basically, the Jalisco cartel, which is a state in uh, central southwest Mexico.
Mhm.
Um, this state is home of this cartel, Jalisco.
Mhm.
And basically, they have so this site in Teuchitlan is a massive graveyard where they were being trained to some extent. And
Mhm.
then from there, they would go to, I want to say Sinaloa,
Mhm.
and where opposition cartels like the Zetas are located, Cartel Sinaloa is located, all of these other cartels.
Mhm.
And then from there, they would be brought to the southern Mexican border, which borders Guatemala.
Mhm.
And from there, they would go into other countries and get into physical altercations with international cartels, basically, especially Colombian cartels. The gist of it is that this training facility is the site of many, many missing people.
Mhm.
And most of the recruitments that happen in Mexico are of young people.
Mhm.
And whenever I talk about the cartel, I always have to remind people because it always leaves people's brains for some reason whenever they start talking about the cartel. There is solid evidence, like solid evidence, that the cartels are backed by the United States. I'm talking about most of the weapons, at least 75% of weapons that land in cartel hands are coming out of America directly, and almost all of them, like 90% of them, are American made.
Mhm.
So they have traceable routes to American manufacturers and they're coming out of America directly. And I'm talking about like people generally tend to think that it's like some kind of like low end technology. We're not talking about like any like street like lock or anything like that. We're not talking
Mhm.
about that. We're talking about like military grade equipment, automatic weapons, things that are illegal for regular citizens, even American citizens to possess.
Mhm.
So Mexican politics are not uniform, meaning like the primary party is Morena,
Mhm.
but there are two other political parties that are especially high in numbers in terms of power.
mm,
And that is, of course, the PRIAN,
mm,
which is the American backed dictatorship political far right wing parties, as well as Movimiento Ciudadano, which is a right wing party. They are a liberal right wing party, quote unquote. A lot of Mexican Americans think that because they're liberal, that they're similar to like some kind of like left wing of American politics. That's not accurate. They are a right wing political group.
mm,
And Movimiento Ciudadano has massive cartel affiliations. They are very pro America, very pro American style liberal democracy.
mm,
And American style liberal democracy means backing the United States and backing free market enterprise, which is how Mexican people have the exploitative water contract in between Mexico and the United States.
mm,
So this Teuchitlan situation, so Jalisco is under Movimiento Ciudadano's control.
mm,
And Jalisco has had a ton of American backed intervention in terms of their elections.
mm,
So that has serious political ramifications and serious political implications. And I think most people don't think that America has anything to do with this. But whenever there's a massive forcible disappearance, America always has something to do with it, like
mm.
guaranteed. Anyway, but that's what's going on with general Mexican politics.
Okay. What does this mean that I mean, I think that what stands out to me is that the people who have been forcibly disappeared have been used as training for to like dehumanize people, or what do you think?
Oh yeah, the interviewee, he said that they were given training that was explicitly coming from former soldiers, from former military,
Mm,
not Mexican military.
mm,
I think he said it was Guatemala military officials, and I think he said one other country, but it was somewhere in Latin America. Guatemala, by the way, also backs the United States.
mm,
I don't know if a lot of people know this, but the Guatemalan president, he's like a staunch Zionist. And Guatemala as a country has had a lot of tragedy in terms of its own electoral politics. And so it's not really surprising that there's like some sort of, I would say, proxy state stuff, proxy state intervention happening.
mhm,
And this isn't the first time, even within the last couple years. Last year, I think I remember telling you about this, but Ecuador did something with the Mexican embassy, like the Mexican embassy. I don't know, something happened. I don't remember exactly, but yeah, there was some intervention that happened on behalf of Ecuador. This is like a very common issue. Like Mexico is always target of American intervention by proxy
mhm.
in Latin American politics, and so is Brazil. Brazil always gets like the short end of the stick too.
Okay. Any other Mexican politic updates?
Yeah, so there's a little bit of an indigenous update. So a lot of people hopefully know about Sembrando Vida, which is the program that Morena had institutionalized. And basically, this program is a priority for all Mexican farmers, but indigenous and African sovereignty being codified into the Constitution grants them access to this program. And basically, it gives people sort of the know how, but also the material resources to help fields recover from like economic devastation or ecological problems. And the gist of it is to ensure that the agriculture is sustainable. So they have like indigenous style, sort of biodynamic, you could say, planting. And basically, this week, there's been like some developments with cacao. And specifically, cacao is being exported now from Mexico, and they're focusing on cacao farmers and sustainability. And it's a really cool program. I just wanted to put it out there because a lot of people don't know about like what kind of things are happening on like a sort of micro scale when it comes to indigenous life in Mexico. And Sembrando Vida is an awesome program. I was telling you before, my dad uses it, and they prioritize especially also native corn, which is
What kind of
fabulous.
materials do they? What do you get from this
Like you get like fertilizer, organic
program?
fertilizer, actually a lot of cases. My dad likes to also grow like native plants because there's like that huge corn legislation happening between the United States and
Uh-huh.
Mexico, like huge political problem because of NAFTA and like all this other trade stuff. But basically, That's what's going on with the corn, and that's what's going on with Sembrando Vida. It's awesome. It's a great program. And if you know anybody,
Is this recent or a recent thing
no, Sembrando Vida has been
it's
around
been around for a while?
for I think since 2020. I want to say Andres Manuel
Okay,
Lopez Obrador. At
so it's
least
not that.
no. The new part is the cacao.
Oh, I see.
Yeah,
I
the
see.
cacao being, but I wanted to put it on people's radar because it's not being that well used. But I think it's because people don't really know about it, or people don't think that it's like real. But it prioritizes rural people and especially indigenous
Yeah.
rural people, which is awesome.
Hmm.
It's an awesome program.
America could never.
I know, right? Indigenous forward programming for indigenous
I mean,
plants and stuff.
America's like you can't grow your own food.
Yeah, they legislate against it.
Work under capitalism is the next topic. Okay.
So I think that a lot of people have been talking a lot lately about the military and sex work or any kind of adult work, not necessarily direct sex work like escorting or anything like that, but cam service, OnlyFans, all these other jobs that I would say are politicized in
Mm.
one way or another. Okay, do you think it's possible to have ethical work under capitalism, or do you think that it's inherently violent?
I think it's inherently violent. I think that okay, I was initially kind of like leaning towards yes, but now I'm like leaning towards no because I think even if you like were working your dream job, you were even if you were still like doing what you wanted to do and you were like helping people and all this stuff, I think the transactionality of it, the money piece of it, it makes it inherently unethical.
Yeah, I do think so too. I think that when people say that there's no ethical consumption under capitalism, this is actually what they're referring to, not just like you having a little treat or
Mhm,
whatever, or people trying to like justify not boycotting or whatever. Um, I think this is what they actually mean. That our like
mhm.
experience as Americans is an inherently violent thing.
Yeah, I mean, the other question that came up for me too is that like what is ethical consumption? What does that look like? Like a consumption that is like not harmful to the environment, that is not like um, harmful to other people. Like, is that what people are thinking of when they're thinking of ethical consumption?
I mean, I hope that that's not what people are thinking. I think like ethical consumption is possible under capitalism, or
Mm.
at least like more ethical consumption is possible. I don't think that there's like an absolute here, right? Like there's
Yeah,
no
or
like
like a harm reduction kind of perspective.
maybe not even harm reduction, rather like sort of not capitalist form of participating in consumption. And
Mm,
this is like something like I try to live my life by. And basically I like to buy local, particularly my vegetables and fruits. I do anything that gets boycotted by any social movement for any reason, I will also boycott.
mm,
I will boycott it. Doesn't matter what it is. But I think when it comes to consumption, I do think that people can like go to farmers markets instead of going to Safeway. Like, but then there's of course the question of like food deserts.
mhm,
Like you know, it's just not possible to like have an absolute there. But I think like for people who have the ability, they can do their best, and I think that is the most ethical thing that you can do. Is like
mhm,
try your best when it comes to consumption. I think there's no ethical consumption, but there is definitely unethical consumption. Like
mm,
if you buy tons of stuff and you that you don't need, and if you just buy to buy things, then I think you're an unethical consumer. If
mhm,
you don't ever do any boycotts, if you don't ever participate in any kind of like social movements that are
mhm,
economic against capitalism, I do think that you're an unethical consumer.
mhm.
Like I think if you like trade in oil, you're a bad person.
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking too in the context of work. What I guess what makes it ethical or unethical is what you are producing.
That's a really good point. I also think this is one of those things like there's definitely unethical work. And I think the unethical like the primary most obvious, most overt unethical work is the military. And I know a lot of people have a lot of feelings about that either way because the fact is that as leftists, as people who are on the political left who are left of center, we do have to weaponize the military in our favor because a lot of the people in the military are disenfranchised people, economically displaced people, people who are very much like harmed by American capitalism.
Mhm.
And a lot of them are people who are profoundly just marginalized.
Mhm.
And I recognize that they are already there. So like
Mhm.
what do we do about them, right? Like and I think that our responsibility is to like educate them and try to like pull them out of that a little bit, at least to like to the point where they can reject the necessity of the military. Because I said this and I was talking to you about this before, but the American military is the biggest world polluter. It is the biggest polluter of planet Earth. It is inherently harmful, it is inherently violent. It also kills the most amount of people.
Mhm.
And that's not even counting the militaries that the United States weaponizes to engage in its proxy wars.
Mhm.
So I think ultimately I would say that the American military is 100% the most unethical position, the most unethical job.
Mhm.
And I have compassion for a lot of people who go into the military because I understand like why they do it.
Mhm.
And you shouldn't join the military and you're a loser if you do.
Mhm. I mean, a comparison to sex work too, I think is interesting because you're almost describing some of the situations that bring people into sex work.
I think I think I have a really unique perspective on sex work though.
Mhm.
Because I went into sex work from a domestic violence situation
Mhm.
and I was able to reclaim my sexuality and specifically like I had a lot of experience with sexual violence. So I was allowed to have sex with a paywall,
Mhm.
but also with a very much like controlled environment that I got to dictate. So
Mhm.
like it gave me the sense of like autonomy that like because here's the thing is that like when you're in the field, you can charge for everything. So you can decide based on money what you don't want to engage in. And that gave me a sense of freedom. So I didn't find it to be like a survival thing. In fact, like
Mhm.
I would say that I lost money, especially the beginning parts of my career, um, because it was just really hard to get started. It was really hard to make money, like real money. And so I was just doing it for like my coffee. Because you know, I liked to buy fancy coffee and I like to buy like direct trade coffee.
Mhm.
So I was paying like $7 a cup of coffee before it was cool. And you know, I that's what I was doing my like I was selling my little nudies and doing my little things for.
Mhm.
But yeah, my experience was like really, really positive. So I can't say that that would have been my experience with the military. I know for a fact that they brainwash you. That's like the initial part of the military is they give you like the boot camp or whatever, and they yell at you and like tell you that you're like a piece of trash or whatever,
Mhm.
and then they like dehumanize you, and then like they dehumanize other people. Like they inherently insert racism into your like curricula to like
Mhm.
get you to like not care that you're murdering children overseas.
Mhm.
So I just like I don't know. This is all by the way, this is all being brought up for me because there was this conversation on social media about like people of color not being able to be criticized for being in the military.
Mhm.
And I thought that was asinine. I thought it was ridiculous. Like I think it's absolutely ridiculous, especially because as an indigenous person, and I'm not federally recognized north of the border, but I am indigenous, and seeing indigenous people join the military and participate in colonialism, neo-colonialism, that gives me a lot of very weird feelings, and it makes me feel like that is not indigenous. That is not like native. There's no way that that could be a native practice. Like you can't still identify with indigeneity and be in the military. Somebody who is native, who's also native Mexican, she raised a really good point though, and it was in this video that I thought was really interesting, where she said like, "But what you don't want is an all-white military." And I thought that was a really valid point. So I just wanted to put that out there because I don't want an all-white military. That does sound spooky.
That
Eh,
does sound spooky.
and I don't really know what to do with that. Like, I feel a lot of cognitive dissonance about that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a complicated conversation. I mean, it's kind of like you don't want an all-white military, you don't want an all-white police force, you don't want an all-white anything. You want an all-white anything. you know? So I don't know. I guess it's like this is one of those like, okay, is this like a changing the system from within kind of situation that people are trying to do, or is this also like a kind of a harm reduction thing?
I really don't know. I really don't know. What I do know is that, like, the American empire, and maybe this is like a chicken and egg situation too, but does the military come down before the American capitalist system does, before the American political structure does? And ultimately, are the people of color in the military going to side with other disenfranchised people? Are they? Because
Mhm.
from my point of view, a lot of them have really adopted a liberal sort of view
Yeah,
of
that's true.
of oppression,
Mhm.
and but it's still oppression. It's like oppression, but like gay, and
Mhm.
like oppression, but like trans,
Mhm.
oppression, but like ethnic,
Mhm.
and that somehow because they're economically disenfranchised, it justifies stripping the global south for everything that it's worth. Like there are black people in Congo who are suffering as a result of American military intervention. There are Mexican indigenous people that are being economically disenfranchised and um, marginalized and absolutely violated by American foreign policy. Not to mention the fact that there's military, American military at the border right now that
Mhm.
are watching Mexican people drown and doing nothing to stop that from happening.
Mhm.
Not to mention all of the CIA operations that are carried out by American military everywhere else in the world. Like I have a lot of feelings about this. Like I think like absolutely without a doubt the American military is like the worst question that like leftists have to contend with, but also it is absolutely the worst job.
Mhm.
Like you shouldn't join the military. And also if you're already in it, you should leave. By the way, I'm going to take a moment to plug Mike Prisoner's podcast. Even if only 5 people see this, if one of them is military, they should really go and listen to Mike Prisoner's podcast. It's called Eyes Left,
Mhm.
and it was under Empire Files, but I think it just got adopted by Breakthrough News. And Mike Prisoner is a Iraqi vet who advocates for people to get discharged from the military. And he does a lot of like leftist work. He's a communist. He does a lot of really interesting pieces. One of my favorite podcast episodes was the episode that he did about American military officials defecting to North Korea.
Mhm.
It's fascinating
Same.
information. Um, yeah, anyway, he covered a lot of really interesting topics, and he also provides a lot of resources for the vets who are looking to get involved in sort of stopping the American empire, who have been radicalized by their experience in the military. Yeah, but anyway, I just wanted to plug that really quickly.
How does therapy fit into all this?
How does therapy fit into all this? Do you think that it's possible? Okay, so this is why this is coming up, just for full transparency. So there are people on social media who are licensed social workers who have the same degree as you.
Oh.
You know, they're very critical of the far left. They're very critical of communists. They're very critical. Like these are therapists. These are social workers. People who
Mhm.
have a background in working with society and people. And as a sociologist, like I just wanted to get your take on it.
This is kind of related to what we've been talking about too, where sometimes people feel like because they have a degree or a license or something that it absolves them of the ability to be like a participant, just be like part of the knowledge base, be part of the community, and they become more like like a power shift that people rely on to start policing definitions instead of contributing to definitions. But like the higher up that you go, especially if you let these things that are kind of arbitrary, licenses and degrees, if you let them get to your head, then you become an enforcer of what is like a beneficial definition to capitalism.
Yeah, I mean, it's resting really heavy on my soul that like somebody who was stalked. I'm using the word somebody, and I'm using vague terms because I don't know if the person wants me to bring this up again. It's kind of been a while since the initial issue came up.
Mm,
But basically, somebody was getting stalked by a person who has nearly 2 million followers. And they brought up the fact that this person was critical of a marginalized person
mm,
rather than addressing the fact that they were being stalked as like a way
mm,
to say like gotcha, like you're not as left as you think you are because you're criticizing this marginalized person for joining the military. And then when people brought up in their comments, and their therapist, when people brought up in their comments that it was to say, I'm a therapist, I know what victim blaming is, and these people are weaponizing definitions.
mm.
That's weighing on my soul. Like it's weighing on my soul. I think that's
Yeah. I mean, what they should have said was, "Let me reflect on that." Because it sounds like they were having a hard time really absorbing that information that maybe they were causing harm in what they were saying, which I think most therapists have a hard time with.
oh really?
Yeah, it's kind of like, like when a client tells you, it's like you fucked up or like I mean, it's hard for a client to say that because of the power dynamic, but it is also hard for a therapist to actually respond to that in a way that isn't defensive.
Do you think that part of the reason that therapy is like that in the United States is because the power dynamic of therapy has been really stripped of its sense of community?
Yeah, it's kind of an interesting dance, right? Because I think there's a part of like, I think a lot of people are not reliable narrators, but at the same time, therapists are also so biased, but we're portrayed as unbiased, or that's like how I guess the traditional therapy, the Freudian therapy, it to be like is that therapists are supposed to be like not political or not have opinions or not share parts of their life, and there's definitely room for that conversation. But all of these walls around this like emotional caretaking is what it is. At the end of the day, make it so that people are not really being real, if that makes sense. And I can see how I'm doing that too, even with like with my therapist. There's a few layers of performativity, a few layers of like guardedness that come up. It's very structured. This is all like the behind the scenes stuff that's happening in therapy. But if we were to apply it to this situation with the victim blaming, I think this is just like a moment of feedback. You know,
Do you think that therapists are more prone to take it personally when they hear feedback from
yeah. I think there's a study.
there's a study about it?
Yeah, and this is where feedback informed treatment fit. Remember?
I do
Yeah,
remember.
yeah. I mean, that's the tool for therapists to receive feedback. In my experience, especially with therapists who have been usually this is with therapists who have been doing the work for a longer time, but they get a little bit more like defensive when they receive feedback.
He's a new, or they're a new therapist.
I'm wondering too. Sometimes the way that you're trained to see this work, the way that you're trained to view this like emotional labor.
Therapists should have sociological education rather than family therapy education because I
Yeah,
think I think a lot of it really does stem from the fact that like social work is social work.
yeah.
And I think it's a very different approach to like take in feedback from all of society versus like taking feedback from a nuclear family's point of view.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's like, yeah, and there's room to. I think a lot of like, the MFT programs that are trying to be more responsive are trying to involve some more of that like social justice lens. And that's really been a huge buzzword in the field for a long time. But yeah, I mean, I think it's really the difference between like a very clinical emotional labor versus like a community focused emotional labor, right? Where like some people go to therapists to like address the symptom, and then some people go to therapists because they're feeling lonely. They need like
Friendship.
they need friendship, and that's some people that's what they go to therapy for, and it's like just having somebody that's consistent in their lives, even if it's a very transactional relationship. And that just speaks to the community piece. Like if people had good people, I think therapy would be less of a need.
Do you think that this has a lot to do with the fact that therapists are not prepared to make their jobs obsolete?
Oh yeah, and this is the capitalism piece.
Right. Can you talk a little bit more about like what that means about
Therapy.
making your job obsolete?
The idea of working yourself out of a job is it's like in the context of therapy, it's about making people confident enough, self sufficient enough to not need a therapist. And that's the ideal piece. I think where capitalism can obfuscate that is, even in like private practice models where you really benefit from somebody like coming consistently for years and years and years. So you really have to like, you know, check yourself, reel that in when you're working in those settings. I think it's a little bit different when you're working in like agency settings where maybe there's like a wait list of people, a wait list of patients or clients, and you have to like the opposite problem happens where they limit the amount of times you can see a therapist. It's only like 12 sessions or something. The goal is to get people to a place where they have community, they have tools, they can figure out their problems for the most part on their own. 'Cause therapy is pretty inaccessible, pretty expensive. It takes a long time to find a therapist that you like, too, even if you have all the things that you need to get access to therapy. And you do put yourself up uh, to some level of harm, to potential harm.
Oh yeah, I've had bad therapists before who
Oh
have
yeah,
harmed me. Totally.
yeah.
Can you speak to so you come from a narrative therapy background. Can you tell me about like what the deficiencies are in the narrative therapy model, especially in the context of it being a practice that originates with indigenous people?
Hmm. Well, yeah. So that was my original training. I feel like this podcast is turning into a therapy podcast.
I I want people to know. I think this is important to talk about.
Yeah,
We're talking about ethics and capitalism, and I think this is very relevant to the reality that like we're facing. Like I think we have to be critical of things that make us feel good and
yeah,
things that
yeah.
make us feel better. So you come from a narrative
Oh,
therapy
okay.
background. Can you speak to the narrative therapy and indigenous context of it all in the context of capitalism and how it sort of removes this community forward thinking maybe like I'm not sure exactly what criticisms you have but I wanted to learn more about that.
Yeah. Yeah. So, let's say my main uh, modality of therapy is narrative therapy, which is to put it short, it's like the use of storytelling as a tool to change your relationships with your problems. And that was where I'd say my initial therapy training started. So I'm pretty like those are parts of my foundation. I think over time I have found that some of the downsides to narrative therapy that it can be a little bit too conceptual. Also, think to speak to the community piece, the indigenous piece. Narrative did come from indigenous communities initially, and this is like obviously storytelling is a pretty common indigenous tool, right, to like pass down history, which I think is a form of therapy in itself. To like maintain your connection to your culture. Um, and it was repackaged, into like narrative therapy for a Western consumption. This was like I think in the 1990s or something. Narrative therapy is fairly new, but originally it came from like New Zealand, Maori, and some of their ideals around like externalizing problems. They spoke about problems. Um, so, you know, all that being said, I think what I've done to try to like fill that gap in my training is I've almost gone to like the opposite side. So I'm also in the EMDR piece. EMDR therapy is very structured. It's almost scripted to some degree, and it doesn't actually require a lot of talking. So I've been able to use both to fill the gaps in both. So I think EMDR can be very like clinical, whereas narrative is more like creative, artistic. EMDR is like maybe that's the science part of it. Um, yeah,
Do you think that the fact that it's been made for Western consumption has taken away important aspects of it?
yeah, definitely. And there are aspects that I will never know, unfortunately.
Oh, yeah.
I think that's like the sad part is that you know that something's missing.
Yeah, I like to cite this all the time, but Marx's communism is based on Mesoamerican pre-Hispanic culture. I think like therapy is sort of like built in to our communities,
Mhm,
and it's sort of a practice that happens every single day, and it happens with everybody around you. It happens with my dad, it
mhm,
happens with my nieces, my nephews, my cousins,
mhm,
and we all sort of talk to each other in a way that's therapeutic, it's validating, we reflect back problems to one another. And the interesting thing too is that like my family, I'm a lot more vitriolic outside of my community. I'm a lot more violent outside of my community, I would say.
mhm,
And I think that's true for everybody. But I would say that one of the primary reasons is because I am not worried about letting people go out here in the world. Whereas,
mhm,
like in my community, nobody's cancelable. Those people are always going to be there because their relationship with their land can't be erased.
mhm.
And so we have to figure out ways to manage problems without like discarding people.
Yeah.
Nobody can be thrown away in the
Mhm.
community. And if you are going to be held to account for something serious, there are equally serious ramifications, but they're decided on as a community. So you don't get to decide as an individual.
Mhm.
And I think this is a very unique thing to the United States that like your friends can like all suddenly flip on you and you can like lose whole friend groups.
Mhm.
And I think like that necessitates I think for one, it comes from poverty. Like a lot of these problems come from being poor. And for two, I think a lot of that necessitates therapy. Like it's a good environment for therapy to be required in
Mhm.
because it's an artificial sort of
Yeah. I mean, it's like a capitalist tool that has been created to put a Band-Aid on problems from capitalism.
yeah. Yeah. So do we think that under communism therapy will be necessary?
I think so. I think so. I don't think it's gonna look like how it looks now.
Do you think it'll be like less do you think it'll be treating with less like major problems? Can you tell me how much you talk about politics? I don't know if you're allowed to share that information. Do you talk about politics a lot at work?
Yeah, I do.
That's really
I think some
interesting.
of it is that, I have the freedom to and don't work for anybody. I think the other piece too is that I do assess the situation. I think it's like sometimes the client will bring it up and I can almost always level. I can almost always like engage with that conversation. I think talking about politics is like it's a tool in my tool belt. I don't have to use it all the time, but when it's needed, it's very helpful.
That's interesting.
Mm,
So, I guess what this implies then is that the political world, particularly the capitalist world that we live in, is in the United States,
mm,
has a huge impact, like a direct impact on your work. Meaning like
mm.
you're dealing with it verbally directly all the time.
Yeah, let's say so. Even if it's not verbal, even if it's not direct, it's always there.
Do people bring up a specific policy sometimes?
Yeah,
Oh,
especially
interesting.
around the inauguration, the election, and that was like I was talking about that with different people like 8 hours a day, and I was exhausted.
That's so
Um,
interesting.
but it's mostly it comes up around like identity, immigration, family
Oh,
separation. It comes up a lot around like fear and anxiety, especially for trans folks. Um, but even if politics in those conversations is not explicit, it's always there.
I will say this about communist countries as it stands. China has really good gay policies. It has decent trans rights codified into its law. There's some issues still, definitely some work to be done. And similarly, more progressive countries like Mexico moving in these directions, they've codified a lot of gay rights, social liberties. They've they've done a lot more politically. What do you think therapy is going to look like in a world like that? Especially if capitalism in the United States fell.
My first idea was the local aspect of it. I think every community has its healers, even like geographical neighbors. I'm like, okay, I'm imagining if we were living in a communist society, I would probably just be like a local helper, just be
Interesting.
walking around everybody's houses, and that's kind of how like life on the ranches, right? You
Yeah.
just go and you go to people's houses, they feed you, you talk about your stuff, what's been going on, and so there would be like a little bit more of like a relationship, right? I think that's what therapy would look like.
And my Pueblo people have that effect on you?
Yeah, I mean that's how it is, or that's how it was in Vietnam too. I think also with like my friend moving close, I'm like going there all the time. We're just yapping, right? And like that's what local therapy would look like, or like therapy under a communist structure would be you actually just go into people's houses, and you get your food, right? You get like a little bit of exercise, and you help them out with a chore or two, and that makes people feel good.
What would you do if you didn't have to make money?
I would probably be a farmer, or I would travel.
Travel and be a farmer. Be a
Yeah,
traveling farmer.
yeah, that sounds great.
We have one more thing. So there's this narrative about sex work in particular,
Uh
and
huh.
I wanted to ask your input as a therapist.
Uh huh.
So are you familiar with the term gooner?
No.
Okay, so gooner is like a Gen Z term,
Okay.
and it's basically this idea of like people who are addicted to porn.
Oh, okay,
It's
okay.
like heavily pathologized. It's really, 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 really embedded in especially the alt right of Gen Z. And it's this idea that porn is inherently addictive.
And Gunnar like negatively connotated.
Oh, yeah. They're viewed as like people who are pathologically addicted to porn. So, like, we
Okay.
know that porn is not actually addictive, right? Like, we know that that's not real.
Gunners. That's a funny word.
I think it's really gross. Like, ew, why would you call it that? I think it's a reference to masturbation. So,
Is
like,
it?
repetitive masturbation and, like, compulsory
Oh,
masturbation.
I don't think porn is the problem. I think there's like I think the addiction part is the problem.
Right.
So, and you could say the same thing about like alcohol or sex or love or weed, whatever it is. Part of like having you can have a relationship with those things, but if it's no longer a consensual relationship, like you're like using more than you would like, or it's like used as like a numbing tool, or like it's you. A lot of people will use porn or alcohol or weed to like put a band-aid on a problem and not actually solve the problem. Whatever, even if it's like loneliness, if it's like conflict avoidance, if it's like feeling your feelings. But I guess to take that to that like gooner like level and actually add shame to it, I think it's really interesting.
I don't think that porn itself is addictive. I don't think that's true. I think that what's addictive is the positive feeling, right? Anything that
Mhm,
gives you positive feeling in the United States, people
mhm,
are gonna use and use and use and use and use because
mhm,
nothing feels good in this country.
mhm,
For me, like I'm addicted to Hello Kitty Dream Village. I
mhm,
love Hello Kitty Dream Village. Does that mean that I deserve a nickname too?
mhm.
And like that I need to be pathologized for it?
Villager.
Yeah, villager. Yeah, I don't know. I think like addiction is like one of those things that I have a lot of intimate experience with as
Mhm,
somebody who's like fucked around with drugs, but also as somebody who has my mom, as you know, she died from cancer as a result of her addiction.
mhm,
And I would say this, if my mom lived a really beautiful life like I do, I think she would be a very different person, and I don't think she would have developed an addiction. I think one of the biggest problems that she was coping with was the state of affairs and her mother trafficking her. See, that's
Mhm.
the other thing. I have like intimate experience with actual traffickers too, so I know the difference between trafficking versus sex work. But also, I think like addiction is like a very political subject. It's heavily politicized.
Mhm.
And I think it's weird to like pathologize people for their porn consumption. I don't know. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I can see that. If you wanna, like, stop your use or reduce your use, then maybe shame is helpful for that, but I don't think that shame should be followed by community exclusion.
Right. That would probably contribute to the problem.
Yeah, 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 and a lot of times it does, right? Whether it's, them isolating themselves or, like, their families pushing them out.
I think that sex workers fit into this conversation about gooners as a positive, actually. Because
Uh-huh.
I think like if what they're craving is like good feeling, having good feeling paired with human interaction would be a good thing. Like direct human
Mm,
interaction. I'm talking about escorts specifically. And I think that actually removing the human element of it and seeing people have this sort of like very Hollywoodified view of sexuality
mm,
while also being able to consume it instantaneously, I
mhm,
think that is somewhat more like problematic, but only because of the condition that people are in.
mhm,
Not because the porn itself is the problem,
mhm,
rather because the people consuming it don't have an infrastructure of people around them to like help them
mm,
have that human to human interaction and have like a healthy sex life.
mm.
And I also don't think that consuming porn is bad. Like I think consuming porn is great. Like I think people should do it and I think people should use it as a part of life enrichment.
There's
And
definitely ethical porn under capitalism,
there's definitely ethical porn under capitalism. Definitely
and
ethical
there's
porn.
unethical porn under capitalism as well.
Definitely. Definitely. And I mean there's also like there's and I say this I say well I used to say this all the time. Now I don't because I haven't talked about sex work in a really long time. But amateur porn is really important to consume. You should consume amateur porn. You should
Mm,
consume porn from real people who are kind of like regular looking. You
mm,
shouldn't consume porn from people that have everything done
mhm,
because of beauty standards and like white supremacy and stuff like that. You should
mhm,
consume porn of people that look like you. You should consume porn of people that like don't look like you. Like you should consume porn that like includes like no cuts also like porn of like just regular people having regular, non-spectacular sex that's like representative of you.
mhm,
Um, and I think that would also handle a lot of the like objectification of women, and I like because that can be problematic as well. But I think that's also like a product of capitalism because porn is made to sell,
mhm,
and if porn wasn't made to sell, then it wouldn't have as many issues. And if the demographic of people wasn't already groomed by American capitalism to consume a specific aesthetic, then I think that it would also have very different ramifications.
mm.
Like if the beauty standard was completely different, I think porn consumption would also look different. Because something that's spectacular also like porn is a really interesting thing to talk about and to think about because you would be surprised, like, who consumes it and what's most popular. That's, like, the deviance of it all. We've talked a little bit about all the topics that we wanted to talk about, so I think this is gonna be cool to cut.